Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm really excited about today's guest, William Adams, and he's a tech entrepreneur. But most importantly, we're going to talk all about the intersection of tech, AI, Web3, blockchain, how it's changing the world, intersects with social media, create wonderful podcasts such as this. He's a tech advisor, speaker, philanthropist, and I love talking to individuals such as William on the show. And William, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know we were talking backstage before this recording and kind of tell people how you know your story, and we'll delve right into the conversation.
Yeah, well, my story is I have a long history in tech. I'm about to turn 59, if you can believe that. So I've been in tech since before tech was tech. So I started programming when I was about 12 years old, back in the day before personal computers were personal. But I've had a long career doing stuff. I spent 24 years at Microsoft. I recently retired, as it were, from Microsoft to do my own stuff. But yeah, 24 years at Microsoft, and I don't know, about 20 years before that in my own company with my brother doing all sorts of stuff in Silicon Valley. So I'm just a tech guy. I've written code my whole life. I still write code today. And I've gotten into things like the blockchain and AI and all the rest. And when I was leaving Microsoft, the pinnacle of my career at Microsoft, I was the technical advisor to the CTO.
Yeah.
His name is Kevin Scott. Yeah. So one of his technical advisors.
Interesting. Yeah. Because in my early days, because I started my career, pre-med, medical, going through that traditional route. And, all throughout undergrad, I was like, oh, tech's a bubble, it's a scam, same thing what we're talking about with, Bitcoin and digital assets and Web3, everybody's saying, oh, it's a scam. I miss the internet, I miss Google, but when Facebook came on the scene, I got in, I saw the power of social media and never looked back. So yeah, what's interesting is, you've got an interesting story, underdog story. I'm an underdog as well. And we're going to talk about how you crafted your story. And so kind of talk about this state of tech where we are today. There's generational differences colliding. We've got demographics, we've got debt, macroeconomic, we got war. So kind of talk about how tech intersects in all of this.
Ooh, that's a that's a big one. Let's go back to the creation of gunpowder. And I've actually used that analogy before. I mean, technology is like that, right? Like technology is the thing that is a curve that we ride that gives us certain boosts in things along the way, right? Like the invention of, I don't know, the automobile, right?
Yeah.
That was an inflection point. We suddenly, in the Industrial Revolution, went from being behind the plow with the ox and the horse to suddenly using steam engines and gas-powered engines and diesel and railroad and all these other things. And it transformed societies, right? And then along came airplanes, and that transforms again, and now we're into rockets. And then in the, 50s, 60s, we started to have transistors and computers, and that transformed society again to the point now where we all walk around in our pockets with supercomputers. This literally would have been considered a supercomputer when I was younger. And it's just an iPhone 12. Yeah. So technology has these, it kicks society every once in a while. And we go, what is that? For some people, it's fear, right? Yeah. Where it's like, what is that? It's going to take my job. This is what we're experiencing right now with the advancements in AI. What is it? It's going to take my job. And then other people are like, what is it? That's great. That's a new tool I can use. And then there's, what is it? How can I use that to exploit people? Right? You have all three of those happening at the same time. So yeah, that's how those things collide. I mean, technology is just a tool. It's a continuum of advancements of human intelligence. And then we use it in different ways in our societies, depending on where you are, right? And my goal is to get people on the leading edge of tech so that they can be using it rather than be plowed under by it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting, and kind of talk about this. Raoul Pal, Kathy Wood talk about this and also Peter Diamandis. They talk about this exponential age, and
Yeah.
basically talk about like Moore's law and
Oh
how
yeah, yeah.
change is so fast. It's like Twitter speed fast these days.
Yeah, and it's I had this discussion with my brother. I have an older brother, and we've been in tech together since, I don't know, for 30, 40 years. And I try to explain to him what exponential growth is like. Like Moore's law says, you're going to double in compute power every 18 months, 2 years, something like this, for the same price or the same space or whatever. And it's hard to really grasp what that means. Like I held up my iPhone and said, oh, this is the supercomputer from 20 years ago. It's like, imagine that, and I literally mean this, when we had Cray supercomputers, these were room-sized computers, literally, like not small room, not like a bathroom-sized room, but a huge room computer. Now it's shrunken down to the size of something you stick in your pocket, right?
Yeah.
That's exponential growth. When you double and double and double and double, things get really small really fast, and they get super powerful really fast. And all we use them for is text messaging, And before we were using computers to calculate, well, to get us to the moon. The computer that got us to the moon, I mean, a calculator would be 10 times faster than that today. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking really basic, simple things. And we got to the moon, right? We used to calculate things like nuclear explosions, what's going to happen when you let this bomb go off and whatnot, or weather predictions, stuff like that. Now we're using them to do things like, well, can I have the car drive itself? Can the robots walk and pick up things and work in a factory, right? And some of it is, as I explained to my brothers, like, just take everything you've seen and heard about in science fiction over the last 20 years. That's today. It's happening now. And it's hard to understand that, because it's like, what do you mean it's happening now? Self-driving doesn't really work. It's like, give it 6 more months and it's going to be twice as powerful as it is today. And today can already get you from point A to point B without you touching the steering wheel. So yeah, the advancements in technology is really hard to understand, but just understand that, yes, the machines are getting more powerful. The algorithms are getting more powerful, meaning the programs are becoming simpler. We are now using the computer to generate the programs for itself. So it's going to make itself more powerful, right?
Yeah.
And then we get to reap the benefits, or we get to be scared. Either way or both.
Yeah. It's quite interesting because I've been using ChatGPT since January, and the capabilities now versus January it's almost like
Right.
magnets, almost 10x. And then I'm excited to see what's going to happen next year with what it can do. The next thing. Go ahead.
Well, sorry. And speaking of ChatGPT, because you go down that path, and it's like, for those who don't know, ChatGPT is this conversational thing. Instead of search, you can actually talk and ask questions and get answers and have a back and forth with it. And I have a virtual assistant that helps me do all of my scheduling and all this stuff. And she at first was like, oh, I was telling her about ChatGPT last year. She's like, oh my God, that's going to take my job. It's like, no, it's going to make you more powerful. And it allows you to create those documents or create this schedule or create whatever more quickly, right?
Yeah.
So the burden of certain things in your intellect have been lightened, just like factory automation made it such that our physical burdens were lightened. The tools like ChatGPT make our intellectual burdens lightened, so we can think even more things, right? So sorry, you were going to ask something.
No, I was just going to say, it's almost like, because like you're alluding to the Industrial Revolution, factories and machines, they commoditize physical labor. So and now software and AI is commoditizing mental
intellectual labor. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a scary thought, because it leaves us as humanity with, so what do I do then? You don't need my muscles. You don't need my brain. What's left? It's like, well, now you can go surfing.
Oh, now all we need is universal basic income, and everybody can take a year-long vacation or
Yeah, it gets down to that. And without being
yeah.
political about it at all, it's like literally, it's like your physical labor is reduced, your intellectual labor is reduced. What do you want to do? Right? We don't need you to produce widgets anymore. We don't need you behind the plow anymore. What do you want to do, and what does your human intellect want to add to humanity? Right? We can start thinking like that.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see if we get there or not.
And that brings me to my next question is kind of because you were technical advisor to CTO Kevin Scott. And so I know Microsoft's been under the hot seat with the government, a lot of these tech companies. So my question is, I always look at the government and I always think it's like so backwards because like the stuff we're using is still like 50s, 60s, like people try to innovate and then they try to shut it down or regulate it. What is the role of government? Are they just basically corrupt and just kind of want to keep the same, or what is that? What is that?
Well, that's a very tricky thing, right? I mean, government bureaucracies exist without all the labeling. They exist to achieve certain things. Yes, they exist to regulate. That's their job. No one else can do that. And I'm talking about the US government. I'm not talking about any other government on the planet because they're all different. But governments are there to regulate, to protect, to have a shared social good for the country, all that sort of stuff. In particular, bureaucracies their incentives are conformance, right? You must conform, meaning you need to adhere to the regulations. Whether that is good for a situation or not is not the question that they answer. That's not their job. Their job is to make sure you conform. You checked off boxes A, B, C, and D, right?
Yeah.
Is this actually good for the environment or not? That's not my job. My job is to make sure you checked off boxes A, B, C, and D, right? And this is not to say that they're evil. It's just that's what government and bureaucracies are, right? Without any other thing. And a lot of people recognize it's like, oh, it sure would be nice if they had a different incentive. If the incentive was more about satisfying a need, right? Like you don't get rewarded, government employee, unless these welfare recipients get the best outcomes, right? As opposed to we just got to check off the box and who cares whether they had a good life or not, right? So with technology, we can possibly elevate and change some of those incentives to say, well, conformance is no longer good enough, right? Compliance with the regs is no longer good enough. There's some higher order human good that we're after that the technology can help us achieve. Let's get all the regulatory, bureaucratic, fill in the blank stuff taken care of by some AI form-filling thing. Now that's no longer a concern. Now let's focus our attention on how do we get better outcomes, right? I do want regulation of the water quality, air quality, traffic. I do want these services. I just want the incentive to be that the things get better, not just that the check boxes were checked, right? And I think technology can help us get to that state where we can change the incentive to be government serves a good rather than serves to just check the boxes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I love that. I really like that idea. Kind of changing alignments and incentives. We'll kind of shift the narrative a little bit, and because you've actually had a successful career, one of the best company. You were an entrepreneur, and kind of talk about how we can promote more diversity, equity, inclusion, how you made it, and how can people, have more of a say. We talk about BIPOC, people of color and Black Indigenous as well. I'm part of that group as well. So kind of talk about how we can help the people left behind, get an opportunity.
Yeah, we're at an interesting point. For most of my career at Microsoft and in the industry in general, for those who can't see me, I'm a Black man in America. So me in those corporate halls for all these years, I was mostly the only one. I mean, seeing a fellow Black engineer was just few and far between. There were pockets of people, but for the most part, until my last few years in the job, I didn't really see or interact with very many Black folks. I was always the only Black guy in the room, right? And women didn't have it much better. I mean, there were more women than there were Blacks, but not by much, in certain roles. So, but I had an opportunity to help transform that at the company by creating this program called LEAP, where I just cracked the code on how do you hire minorities and women, or underrepresented minorities and women. And it was just as simple as, well, you got to look in different places and you got to reprogram the hiring managers to see people differently, right? You're not going to go to MIT and get more Black folks. There's just not that many there. So you had to look in different places, right? And just allow for the fact that very smart people are everywhere. They don't all look like you, come from the same places as you. So you need to have an apprenticeship program or an internship program that's not based on the college they came from.
Yeah.
Right. So that was one part of it. It was just cracking the code on, well, where do you find the people? Because oftentimes, hiring managers just like, I want to hire more Blacks and women, but they just don't exist. Like, are you kidding? Women are half the planet. How could they not exist? You're just not looking right. So questioning things like, oh, we don't want to lower the bar. The bar is just code for we don't want people who aren't like us. It's a hard thing to fight through biases. And then the other side of it is to say, well, there has to be a business imperative for this diversity. You cannot checkbox your way into this. It doesn't help to have quotas and things like that. It's like, well, we need to hire 10 Blacks and 15 Latinos and 20 Pacific Islanders. It's like, you'll hire them, they'll get in, they'll say, this place doesn't want me here, and they'll be gone within a year, right? So you can't checklist it. You have to have a business imperative that requires that diversity. And in particular, as we're doing more and more AI, where diverse perspectives and data sets is required if you want to win, it's a business imperative that you have a diverse workforce. I mean, forget in the past we would say, oh, diverse workforce, they work better together and you get all these different perspectives and all. It's like, forget about just DNA diversity. If you don't have psychologists, philosophers, religious people, and other people in your workforce over the next 5 years, forget about winning in the AI space, right? So you have to truly be diverse if you're going to win with AI, because otherwise you're going to end up with models that only serve a very niche group, and you're not going to win on a world stage, right? So it's a business imperative that you have a diverse workforce. Now let's work backwards and say, well, how do I do that? Because we're all the same and we don't know how to hire people who are different. Okay, let me show you how to do that, right? But it's a business imperative at this point. It's like, you will not survive this AI age if you do not have a diverse workforce.
Yeah. I think there was a documentary about the AI getting developed at MIT, and it was having trouble because it was basically the models were built based on Caucasians, and so it's like it was having trouble with BIPOC and diversity. So
and there was a famous person at Microsoft who did a study in shades of brown. It's like, hey, the models only recognize like 4 shades of brown. There's at least 20 shades of brown that you need to recognize different kinds of people. So it's stuff like that where it's like, well, where did the data come from and who trained the model is important now, whereas in the past it wasn't.
Interesting. Yeah, no, kind of we have a few minutes left, and you talked about you started event EV3NT, and then what is it and why is it important for communities of color, and with how people can contact you and follow you?
Well, you can contact me, william-a-adams.com. And the event is just a model I have for helping communities essentially hack their community. So it's a way in which that I learned from being in tech, that you can bring people together, and we would typically call it a hackathon, but it's different. In a hackathon, you're looking for like an ultimate winner, right? Like people hack on some code typically, and then they come out and it's like, I won, I got the full prize, and everyone else gets nothing. So the event is different. It's to teach a community how to hack for its own good. So for example, you might have a community that says, oh, we want to solve our, we have a waste management problem with plastics, right? So I might bring in some people who are experts in the field of waste management related to plastics, and maybe someone related to biodiversity and someone related to this. They'll give a mini talk, and then they'll hack with you to solve some problem. And you might come out with something like, oh, we're going to create a degasifier. We're going to turn the plastic back into its component parts, diesel and gas, and we're going to use that to power our generator. You know, this is particularly in a place that's like an island or something like that. So, yes. And now we own the process and we own the patent for this thing that we created, and we can now make money off of this invention that we came up with together. And then when their next problem comes out, like, oh, they want to deal with food scarcity or food security or something like that, they now have the tools necessary to gather together, hack some solution, and produce something that they then own, right? So that's what the event's all about. It's just helping communities put their brain trust together with some help from the outside to solve their own problems, right? Instead of waiting for someone big to come along and solve the problem and then fleece them for all their money for the solution.
Really interesting. Let's thank William for coming onto the show, talking about tech and kind of looking a broad picture, and also talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Be sure to check out all his work and his thoughts. He's got a lot of interesting thoughts and resources. These will be in the links in the show notes. And thanks so much for coming onto the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.